Thank you all for joining us today and welcome to the Monarch Conservation Webinar Series. Today's webinar is Tracking Shifts in Food Availability for Monarchs and Other Pollinators by Erin Posthumus, Outreach Coordinator at the USA National Phenology Network. My name is Jenna Tots, Education Coordinator for the Monarch Joint Venture, and I'm joined by my coworker, Alyssa Taylor, Program Coordinator. We want to thank our sponsors for their support of this webinar series. Supporting sponsors Reinvent Your Waste and CPKC, and community sponsors East Central Energy, Hedgerow Farms, and NiSource. We appreciate your support and dedication to monarch conservation. Before we get started, we do have a few community guidelines and helpful hints for you to get the most out of this webinar. During the webinar, please put your questions in the Q&A box found at the bottom of your screen. We'll collect those and present them to Erin during our Q&A session at the end. Please use the reactions during the presentation. She can see those, and they are so fun to be able to use during the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and posted to the Monarch Joint website, Monarch Joint Venture website on Friday of this week. The entire conservation webinar series is there and available free of charge to watch. There are 9 years of content there, so please search by category and find something that you would enjoy watching. If you're joining us today but did not pre-register, please go ahead and you can make sure you send us your email address so we can count you for attendance and send you some follow-up information. The email is just learn@monarchjointventure.org. Send us your name and email. And we want to remind you that we do have translated captions for this Zoom call. And if you'd like to add those captions in a language other than English, click the arrow on captions at the bottom of your screen and be sure the translation button is on and then choose your caption language. You can also add closed captioning in English if you so choose. And finally, all of our webinar speakers represent their own viewpoints, which are not necessarily those of the Monarch Joint Venture. And now I will introduce our speaker for today. Erin coordinates local, regional, and national data collection projects for the USA National Phenology Network. The USNPN is a national scale monitoring and research initiative based at the University of Arizona, focused on collecting, organizing, and delivering phenological data, information, and forecasts to support national resource management and decision-making, to advance the scientific field of phenology, and to promote understanding of phenology by a wide range of audiences. Erin has a bachelor's in environmental biology and a master's in wildlife conservation and management, and has worked for the USA NPN since 2010. I'll stop sharing and turn it over to you, Erin. Thanks so much for being here.
Great, thank you so much. So yeah, thank you everyone for being here. I'm really excited to be able to share some of the work that we're doing here at the USA National Phenology Network to really help people understand shifts that are happening in both plants and animals due to climate change. So just to start off, as you all are very familiar, there are many different impacts of climate change on monarchs as well as on other pollinators as well. If we think about, the complex life cycle that monarchs have, there's a lot of different ways that climate change can impact these insects. So if you think about, the extreme temperatures that they might be experiencing, that can have a huge impact on their populations. The timing of when things start to warm up, different temperatures happening along the different stages of their migration can also have an impact. Even just the amount of rainfall can really impact the amount of time they're able to fly around, spend time laying eggs. And then, of course, there's lots of impacts on the habitat for monarchs as well, their food resources, as well as the other plants that they're using. And really, that's what I'm going to be focused on today is how is climate change impacting the food resources of monarchs and other pollinators, and how we're trying to understand that through the projects that we're doing across the country. So I wanted to really focus on the Time to Restore project that we have been doing since 2021. This is an effort with collaborators across the South Central region and have a lot of really interesting insights to share from that project and some of the things that people are worried about in terms of how to do conservation and restoration for pollinators, what they're thinking about, and the information that they really need to be able to do that. And then I'm going to briefly touch on a couple other data collection campaigns that we have going on at the NPN, including Nectar Connectors, which is a national campaign, as well as a more local campaign here in Arizona called Desert Refuge that was actually funded through a MJD grant. Just so to start off with, to make sure everyone's kind of on the same page about phenology. So we at the USA NPN, we have been doing this work since 2007 when we were founded, understanding that there wasn't really a great way to have a standardized method of paying attention to changes in phenology, which is the timing of plant and animal life cycle events. So we were set up really for that purpose, to be a standardized way to collect, store, and share phenology data to help us understand how plants and animals are responding to different abiotic factors like temperature changes, precipitation changes. And phenology really has many different applications to a lot of different fields. So maybe the most obvious one is ecology, understanding the relationships between things like plants and pollinators, and whether the timing is changing between the timing of their the flowering versus when the insects are present. But there's lots of applications in other ways as well. Things like tracking pollen and allergy season by knowing when flowers are open. We also do a lot of work informing natural resource managers about insects that are pests, as well as invasive plants as well, and trying to help inform management decisions to make different decisions more efficient. So things like trying to get managers out at the right time to spray for invasive insects like emerald ash borer, or knowing when to treat or remove invasive plants before they go to seed. Phenology is also recognized as a really important way to understand climate change impacts. So even way back in 2007, the IPCC made a statement that phenology is maybe the simplest process to track changes. And it's also one of the earliest ways that kind of is able to pick up on early impacts. So being able to see a mismatch between a plant and a pollinator might be a way to see that there's problems happening before you start to see decreases in population. So it can be a really early indicator as well. So just to kind of put this in perspective too, there have been a lot of big papers that have kind of looked at major changes happening in phenology. So just a couple highlights here. The picture on the right here, the graphic here, is demonstrating the value of some of these really long-term data collection programs going on in different places around the world. I love this one, the cherry tree tracking of the flowering of the cherry trees in Japan. That is just a huge record going all the way back to the 1500s. And because they've documented the timing of when that flowering happens, year after year, we're really able to see how climate change is influencing that timing in the past couple decades, and really see a great moving up earlier flowering of those trees. And we can see that reflected in other populations of other plants across the globe. And then this one on the right here is from a recent UN report looking at mismatches. And this one is showing that across many different taxa, not just trees, we're seeing advances in many different species. So we know that things are shifting, but things are not always shifting at the same rate. Different taxa are moving at different times. So we really need a lot more information to really understand how these things are changing. So our Time to Restore project, which is the first project I kind of want to share today, is an effort that is funded by the South Central Climate Adaptation Science Center. The South Central region is focused on New Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. This project was really inspired by a couple of our partners with the Tribal Alliance for Pollinators in Oklahoma. They recognize that they're trying to do this restoration work for pollinators, monarchs and other pollinators, and they really don't know how climate change is going to be impacting the flowering timing of the plants that they're trying to put out on the landscape to support pollinators. They also are unsure about how the seed timing is going to change as well, and that's important for them because of knowing when to go out and harvest seeds that they use for restoration. So we decided that we would try to do this project to collect a lot more information and try to inform people that are working on restoration for pollinators how things are going to be shifting and what they should be thinking about in terms of what species they might want to be planting given future climate conditions that are coming. So this project was started back in 2021. We received a grant from the South Central Climate Adaptation Science Center, and we initially started out with just 3 of the states in the South Central region. We focused on New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. We realized that given the funding constraints, we weren't able to tackle Texas at that point, but we still had the intention to add it later. And we were lucky to get a second grant this last year. And so we've now added Texas to our project as well. And I have on here the amazing team that we have working on this project. We're lucky to have a lot of really great partners across the region. So we're here in Arizona, outside of the South Central region, but we are coordinating this project. And that's myself, our director, Teresa Crimmins, and then we've been lucky to be contracting with Erin Posthumus, who's been doing a lot of the data analysis for this project over the last year. We also are fortunate to have our partners in New Mexico, the Bosque Ecosystem Monitoring Program, which is affiliated with the University of New Mexico. Kim Eichhorst is our coordinator there. Also Jane Breckenridge with the Tribal Alliance for Pollinators in Oklahoma. Gina Lloyd with the Gulf Coast Phenology Trail. She's also a National Park Service contractor there in Louisiana. And then as we've added Texas, we have a great coordinator, David Gwynn, who's there coordinating our efforts there. We also are fortunate to have a collaborator in Rob Pearl from the Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission, who is our helping as an advisor on data sovereignty for Indigenous groups. And then we have some great collaborations with the National Wildlife Federation and the Botanical Research Institute of Texas as well. So lots and lots of people working on this project. It's been really wonderful to see the interest in this project and the different kinds of organizations that have come out to work with us. So I wanted to share kind of in this flow how we're working on this project. This is also reflected in a story map that we've put together to kind of summarize the project, which I'll share a QR code for that at the end. But how I'm going to be kind of describing this is how we really work to understand the needs of the stakeholders as part of this project, the data collection efforts that are ongoing, how we've kind of created different visuals and gotten a lot of feedback on those, and how we're presenting that information. So we really are trying to use a co-production process here where we're working with the people that we hope will use this information from the beginning of the project. So the first thing we did back in 2021 is we held a series of stakeholder workshops. We got together pretty much anyone who was working on pollinator conservation or restoration in New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. We ended up with a few people from Texas as well, even though we didn't have the people as part of that project yet. Until this last year. So the stakeholder workshops allowed us to get a ton of input on the kind of the needs, what people are using now as far as resources and what they need us to do. We also decided during those workshops to stay in touch through quarterly calls. So we have kind of like a community of practice where every couple of months we have a call. We have kind of a rotating group of people that come to those. And it's a place to provide updates on the project, but also a place to have people share resources. So we'll often have people come and share events or things going on related to pollinator restoration in the region. And then we also intend to have follow-up calls and surveys at the end of this grant to make sure that we're staying in touch with people and making sure that the information that we're producing is useful. The way that we're kind of using feedback that we get at these different stages is through the stakeholder workshops. We're using those to get input at the first part of the project on what the needs were, and then what kind of delivery people wanted the information in. So would it be different visuals? Would it be information added to existing resources? So we got a lot of input on that. We also used the workshops to get input on what kinds of information specifically we should be collecting with phenology. So would it be the beginning of when flowering is happening, the duration, the bloom period, the peak in flowering, and then also which species we should be focused on, which was a really major endeavor for this project. We also got a lot of input on the visuals, as I mentioned, and then we're planning to keep on getting updates and revise those as we go forward. So through the stakeholder workshops, we had a really great mix, especially in our early workshops with the 3 states, from a lot of different kinds of participants. So we had quite a few federal employees and state employees, quite a few members of tribes and pueblos, Also a number of master gardeners and other volunteers that were very interested in pollinator restoration, but maybe were more volunteers instead of professionals. And then a lot of different organizations as well, a number of universities and NGOs and nonprofits. In our Texas workshops, which we just held a couple weeks ago, it was kind of a different mix. We actually had, I think 90% volunteers. We did a lot of promotion to master naturalists and master gardeners. And you can see on the map in the center here, kind of the distribution. We tried to get people from all across the state. We didn't get very many people from North Texas. This is just one of the 2 workshops. So we had a few more people in West and the Panhandle, but a lot of people from kind of the eastern half of Texas, but a pretty good spread. A lot of volunteers, but a number of professionals too. And we asked those Texas participants about kind of their interest in this work. Half of them maintain what they call personal wildscape or a personal pollinator garden. 22% helped to maintain a public garden. And then we had about 13% of the people were there as part of their work. And then a number of people were not yet doing this work, but were really interested in getting started. So kind of an interesting mix across the different workshops. In the Texas workshops, we also spent quite a bit of time asking them about their concerns related to pollinator restoration and conservation, kind of the things that they've already noticed. And it was interesting that there's so many people that kept talking about extreme weather, heat waves and floods and freezes, and how those would impact the species that they care about. And then also just increased temperatures overall, increased daytime temperatures, increased nighttime temperatures. Lots of people talking about drought. Lots of people talking about loss of species and changes in phenology, the timing of when things were happening. Also people talking about habitat loss and invasive species. And then when we ask about what kind of either species or particular things they were most concerned about, given the changes that they've noticed, a lot of people talked about threats to bees and birds. A lot of people also, again, said really concerned about drought, decreases in diversity. Threats to pollinators and monarchs also were mentioned specifically. We also had a number of people that were concerned about the plants, which is kind of what we're focused on as part of this project. And then just general shifts in species. So we had a lot of other mentions of different things as well. Interesting, we did have a number of people mention mismatches, noticing that things were already shifting or being worried about things, flowers not being available for pollinators when they need them, things like that. We also asked at our initial workshops about the kind of places that people get information now, if they're looking to get more information about what species they should plant or when they might expect to see bloom timing for certain species, to know if they want to provide blooms during the spring and the fall for monarchs migrating through the South Central region, or target other times of the year that they might want to make sure that there's nectar available. And a number of people mentioned plant guides from some different organizations. You guys are probably all familiar with these. A number of plant lists and databases as well. People also talked about, especially the master naturalists and gardener guides, those being a good source. Different organizations that send out different newsletters and other publications that offer advice. And then a number of people mentioned just having local knowledge as well, kind of knowing what's worked for them in their area and going with that. We also ask about the different factors that they think about. And one of the most common was the location. We kind of had this mix of people that were maintaining pollinator gardens in their backyards or, more in urban areas versus people working on, let's say, like a nature center or in a public park or even on federal lands, and kind of knowing what works in different places, what's kind of reasonable to be able to find for different areas. A lot of people are focused on planting for particular pollinators. So a lot of people were thinking about monarchs and what's best to support monarchs, but also other kind of more specialist pollinators as well. And providing both nectar plants as well as other host plants that those different insects need. People also thought about kind of the amount of effort. So that could be that there's a great pollinator plant, but it takes a lot of water to keep it alive where you are. So that was a consideration, kind of how much effort am I going to have to put into keeping these plants alive. That was particularly for more of the natural areas where it wasn't really feasible to be able to provide regular irrigation. A lot of people also talked about the availability of plants. So being able to actually find native plants, especially ones that are kind of locally adapted to their area. There's just not a lot of native plants or seeds available in a lot of locations. And then there were a lot of comments about the plant characteristics as well. So I kind of mentioned the water needs already, but also soil needs. People talked about sometimes trying to avoid things that are more aggressive spreaders, but some people actually liked that. They said, oh, it's easier if the thing can just kind of take over and I don't have to worry about keeping it alive. A lot of people talked about climate resilience, which is also really part of this project. You know, what are the plants that are going to do well under future conditions? Natives versus non-natives. We had a conversation about near natives and trying to be open to that. I think it's hard, and I think some of the federal participants talked about how they just can't use non-natives or near natives. It's just not something that they're allowed to do with their protocols. But we also talked about non-natives that are non-problematic, things that won't be aggressive spreaders might be something to consider as well. We had a lot of conversations about the seed collection. You know, can you even get these things? Is it easy to germinate them? Providing the bloom coverage, maybe you want to make sure that you have nectar available during different times of the year. And then this plants that do the double duty that are both nectar plants and host plants for things like caterpillars also came up. We also ask about the challenges that they've encountered. Of course, funding is the #1 challenge that people usually talk about, but also just staff capacity, being able to have enough time to do this work. A lot of people talked about sustainability of these efforts, being able to manage them over the long term. We also had an interesting conversation about public perception of native plants and people considering things weeds, and different cities having laws about weeds over a certain height, and if you let your pollinator plants kind of go dormant, and which is important for a lot of species as well, being able to leave that there, getting citations and things like that, and that stigma. Again, the native plants for purchase came up. We also talked about invasive species just coming in. We were trying to restore an area that maybe was full of an invasive grass, and just trying to deal with that and return that landscape back to more natives. People also talked about allergies. You're putting in all these wildflowers, and that's another kind of complaint. It's a stigma that you're going to be creating a lot more allergens in an area. And then we talked about how it's difficult. There might be funding opportunities that come up because of a certain administration that's in power, and then that'll go away and the priorities change. This is a big issue for a lot of our federal partners as well. In terms of sources of success, the top one was volunteers, people being able to leverage the power of volunteers and citizen scientists or community scientists. Also, just the partnerships that are so important in these efforts, being able to use the different educational materials. We mentioned all the great resources that are out there, and being able to educate the public using those materials. Also, people mentioned just having individual successes, like I was able to plant a bunch of native plants at my house, and now I see these butterflies that are showing up, and just having that as a small success, a small win that you can kind of use to keep your work going. A couple people mentioned prescribed fire as an important tool in some areas. Trying to get city municipalities involved in efforts has worked for some of our partners, and just trying to change that perception. Maybe if you can convince a few people that weeds are not ugly, that leaving those dead stems are really important, that makes a big difference as well. All right, so we have kind of 3 key things that we pulled out of the workshops that were kind of the main needs that we saw based on what people told us. So one thing was, we were kind of surprised that there were a number of people that didn't feel like they really knew what resources were already out there for finding plants to support specific pollinators. So we put together a spreadsheet based on a lot of the resources that other people from the workshop shared. And we have that as kind of a shared resource for the Time to Restore project. It includes, where you can find these different guides, and then the states or the region that they're relevant to. A big need that came up was also about seed processing and planting, how to germinate native plants. It's not something that we at the National Phenology Network are really an expert in, so we definitely leverage the power of our partners there, and the Tribal Alliance for Pollinators put together a webinar about how they do seed processing. They have a ton of resources on their website, and they actually, in particular for different tribes, they will offer actual equipment for rent to help people do this work. So they were able to share a lot of their techniques and then some of the resources that they have for tribes in that area. And then lastly, a big need that came up was just more information, especially local information about when things are blooming and when they're going to seed. If you think about a lot of the bloom calendars and the planting guides that are out there, they often have information that's fairly vague. If you're lucky, you can find a state level guide or an ecoregion that will have general like seasons or maybe months when things are predicted to be blooming. But it's often not very specific to a local area. So that was a big need. And then also, often those guides don't have any information about how climate change is going to be shifting that timing. So that was really a big thing that we wanted to focus on. And it's been our main focus for the last couple of years. So in terms of the data, we had a lot of discussions around this in our workshops as well. We wanted to make sure that the data and the results that we're outputting are really easy to access and understand. We wanted to make sure the results were as local as we can, which it's hard given data limitations, but we wanted to try to give people, calendars and things that were really specific to their area. We also had a lot of conversations around data sovereignty and wanted to make sure that as we approach different tribes and pueblos to work with us on this project, they're aware that they have total ownership of the data that they're collecting. If they want to collect data, they have different options. The platforms that we're using are mostly publicly accessible data, but they're able to use the protocols that we have privately. And then we also talked about how if they don't want to have data collected on their lands, they can still leverage information from nearby. So we talked about different ways that we could do that and kind of give them the information without them having to collect data where they are. We also want to make sure that we're following best practices for ethical seed collection, so not encouraging people when we start to have information about when seeds are ripe and ready for harvest, not just sending a bunch of people out there to collect a bunch of seeds, maybe too many, and then making sure that we are keeping in mind permissions and where you're going out to collect seeds and making sure that you have proper permission for that. And then we've also been thinking a lot about how we can output this information that is not redundant. There's a lot of great existing resources, as we've discovered. And so we're trying to figure out how can we best include the information that we're going to be producing either into existing resources or kind of integrate that in the best, most efficient way. Also, some more specific input. We asked some of our participants in the workshops about what is most useful for you in terms of flowering and seed timing? Do you care most about when that starts? Do you care about the duration, the peak, or the variability, like from year to year, how much it might change? And most people said duration was the most important. It kind of makes sense if you think about, when your blooming is available, when the nectar is available for pollinators. But a lot of people also mentioned the peak, and I think specifically for seeds, knowing, when can I go out that I'll have the best likelihood of encountering ripe seeds, that also makes sense. But really, people thought all of these things were important. So as we go forward, we're kind of making sure that we're encouraging people to report on each step of this so that they can have all that information that we can deliver. When it came to the species, we had a lot of conversations about what are the most important pollinator plants, which ones are the most kind of feasible for people to know more about because they actually would have access to getting those plants for restoration. We also talked about what are the most, maybe the easiest species to observe for someone who's not trained in terms of species ID, but also just accessibility. And we did in our first workshops with New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Louisiana, we did a series of voting exercises, and we tried to narrow it down to a list of 8 species, which are the ones here. And we really tried to get a small list because as we're trying to do data collection, we don't want to be spread out over so many species because we just won't end up with enough data to actually do any analysis and actually do these climate projections. So we tried to end up with a list that at least each state had one or two of these species there. But we've kind of since then broadened out again a little bit. In Louisiana, it's been challenging for them to find a lot of these species in places where people live. So we've added on another 14 species there. And then in our Texas workshops a couple of weeks ago, we just ended up with, I think, a list of over 50 species that people really wanted. We were able to narrow that down to 21 species in addition to these 8. So we're kind of focused on the 8 as things that we hope people will be observing a lot. And then we have a number of other species that people are also tracking, depending on where they live. We are focused on 2 methods for data collection for this project. The Nature's Notebook platform is the USA NPN's platform. This is a national level program where you can monitor phenology of both plants and animals. It does require more training to get set up. It requires people creating an account, setting up a site, and then registering at least one plant or an animal to be able to observe. It's really intended to be repeated observations over time. So we're hoping that people will set up a site and then track it over the course of the year and then multiple years. And then we have an app as well as paper data sheets, but we don't have the ability for people to submit photos. We also are inviting people to collect information through iNaturalist. This is a really easy to observe, really easy to use program. It's great for incidental observation. You can submit photos, so it's something that is a nice way to kind of supplement the data. We can have these long-term observations where people are recording the start and the peak and the end of flowering and seeding timing, and then also have a lot more observations through iNaturalist of usually the presence of flowers or seeds. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time kind of digging into Nature's Notebook because that's what we are focused on here at the NPN. So as I mentioned, this is a national program. We have thousands of people participating across the country. This map is showing kind of the density of data that's come in. You can see that the bigger circles represent a lot of the urban areas where we have a lot of people observing, but we have people spread out all across the country, and we are over 40 million records now in our National Phenology database. Looking at one of our protocols for the purple coneflower, you can see that basically what the protocol is a series of yes or no questions. We're asking people, do you see these different, we call them phenophases or life cycle events? And the person will answer yes, no, or the question mark, which is not sure. So that's kind of the presence information where you're saying, yes, I see flowers, or yes, I see open flowers. And the flowers or flower buds is kind of an overarching question where it's any flowers at all, and then the open flowers is digging into whether the flowers were open. For each of these questions, we have these really detailed definitions that are really describing what that looks like. So for open flowers, you're looking for when the reproductive parts are visible between the flower parts, and then don't include wilted or dried flowers. So we're trying to provide a lot of details to make sure that people who aren't familiar with botany, don't have that background, can come to this program and still be able to answer the questions. In addition to the presence absence questions, we also have what we call intensity or abundance questions. So for flowers or flower buds, we're asking you how many flowers or flower buds are present. And these are counted in inflorescences. So for this, you would count this as a single flower. And then for the open flowers questions, we're asking about the percent that you estimate are open. And really, we're trying to provide bins to make this as easy as possible. So you don't have to count exactly how many flowers you're seeing, but you're trying to just put your estimate into one of these bins. And so the data that come out of this project are, this is really representing the presence absence information. So you can see the gray bars are those no records where they looked for that phase, but they didn't see it. And then the colored bars are when they did see it. So you can really get a good idea of when things started because you have that information between the last no and the first yes. And then we also have the intensity information where you're really getting at kind of the magnitude, when were the most open flowers on the plant or when were the most ripe fruits. So just to look at this a little bit more closely, you can imagine if someone was observing every 6 days, they are saying no, they don't see open flowers, no, and then a yes. The period of uncertainty, kind of our error here, is about 6 days. But if people are observing more frequently, then that gets much smaller. So that's a much more precise estimate of when that started. So we do try to encourage our observers to monitor every 2 to 3 times a week during the period when things are rapidly happening, and then they can kind of taper off and do less frequent during the winter or when things are already bloomed and kind of off and running. And then with open flowers, we try not to have people get too into trying to figure out exactly what bin they're looking at. We're really just interested in the peak and kind of showing that progression over time. So we try to get people to just think about, how that's increasing, try to identify when the most open flowers were available on the plant. And then I mentioned we also have protocols for animals as well. So this is our Monarch protocol. We have a number of questions about different life cycle stages with definitions for those as well. And so for this one, it's a presence absence question as well as abundance, and you're just entering the number of individuals that you observe in that phase. So a little bit more simple than the intensity for plants. So we have a poll now that I'm hoping Alyssa can launch for us. And so let's try this out with this photo here. I know it's always hard to do this with a photo, but just to kind of get the experience of answering these questions, you have the definitions right there on the right. There's 4 questions. You have questions about, do you see flowers or flower buds, and then how many? And then you also have a question about open flowers. And I will just add one more thing on here because this is kind of hard to see. So zooming in, let's just assume that all of these little flower structures down here are open. They look like this one here, basically. This is a single flower head. So given that, try your best to answer these questions. We do have that unsure, which is very important. If you can't answer the question confidently, then feel free to mark that unsure. So we'll give it a little bit of time for people to try to fill it out. Hopefully it's working for everyone. A little bit of a pilot of this poll. Yeah, and thank you. Yeah, if you can't see the text or the picture, you can move that poll around. Hopefully mine isn't blocking anyone's. I actually don't know if you can see where I have my poll in there. Okay, yeah, we'll give it a little bit of time. Do your best. One thing about the platform is it does take a little bit of time when you're first doing it. You're reading through the definition and doing this very carefully. And then as you go back to the same plant week after week, you're kind of already familiar with the definitions and you know what the bins are. So it gets a much quicker. And we estimate it takes about 3 minutes per plant, 2 to 3 minutes once you're familiar with the protocols to complete one observation. Okay, so we've got some answers there. I hope everyone can see these. So everyone said yes for flowers or flower buds. That's great. Again, flowers or flower buds is like any flowers. How many? There's some discrepancy here. I think it's tough, with the photo here. There's some tactics you can do where you kind of like figure out how many structures are in a small area and then multiply that over the plant. I would probably put this in the 101 to 1000 bin. I was able to get up to over 100 kind of doing my estimation. So I think it's several hundred within this photo here. So I would go with that bin. But again, as you do this more and more, it's easier, after you've looked at the plant week after week to be able to get a precise estimate. And then open flowers, most people said yes. And I gave you kind of a cheat with that close up there. Those are open flowers with the reproductive structures visible. And then the percent that are open, that one's tricky, I think, on the photo. I would say probably 95% or more because it looks to me like almost all those are open. But again, it would be much easier if we were in person to be able to look at the plant closely and touch it and look at it. So nice job, everybody. Okay. So, getting back now to the Time to Restore project, we kind of did a deep dive into Nature's Notebook, but I want to bring this back to this project. So the way that we're trying to do the data collection aspect of this is We have lots of promotional efforts. We're really lucky to have hundreds of people that have been involved in our workshops from many organizations. So we're able to get the word out through their different channels. We also created this bulletin flyer that people have put up various places, and we have postcard flyers that are being distributed at different tabling events and things like that. We have a lot of training resources as well. So we have an observer certification course that people can take through Nature's Notebook. There are 5 modules. It takes about 6 hours to do the whole thing. It's a free course. We recommend at least doing the first module because it at least gives you an orientation to kind of how to set up a site and all that. But there's lots of in-depth modules about like how to estimate intensity. How do you do that, like multiplying of structures across the plant to get a good estimate? So we have tons of those resources. We also are making these, we call these phenophase photo guides for our different 8 priority species, and hopefully more of those other additional species as well. These give just kind of some life history of the plant with some imagery of like the entire plant, and then some close-ups of what we're actually looking for in terms of those phenophases. We are really lucky that we have our state coordinators, so the folks I mentioned on the slide with the map, doing trainings across the region. We've done this through train the trainer workshops. Often these are more virtual workshops, but we're also trying to emphasize in-person trainings as well. So we had the Texas workshops, which is kind of an overview of the project and getting all that feedback about, what people care about and what they need. But we're also going to be doing some in-person trainings at like the Master Naturalist annual meeting, the NPSOT, the Native Plant Society of Texas meeting in the spring. So lots of opportunities to do in-person training. A lot of our partners are also doing more general education about phenology. This is a picture from the UT Butterfly Farm, which is affiliated with the Tribal Alliance for Pollinators. They do a ton of outreach on why we need to do restoration for pollinators, and then also teaching about what are resilient plants and what can we do to be more resilient to climate change. So as far as what has come in so far, this is a little bit of an older map of kind of where the data have come in so far. So we have some data. We still need a lot more data, but we have had quite a few observations so far, especially in Louisiana, some in Oklahoma and New Mexico. And then this was actually before we really launched the Texas part of the project. So I think we'll get a lot more data from Texas. But there's still a long way to go, but we do have quite a few records coming in. We have started to put together different visualizations, and we got a ton of feedback on these too in the early iterations. We did this through a lot of surveys and then in our quarterly calls. This is a graph that's showing a bunch of different types of data. So this is iNaturalist records up at the top. This is basically how many records people have reported on common buttonbush. I think this was for Louisiana. I'm remembering that right. And so we figured for a lot of these nectar plants, most of the pictures people are taking are of flowering. This is an assumption that we're still testing, but this is basically showing how many photos are coming in at different times of the year, which we feel like reflects the flowering timing. We also have from Nature's Notebook, the number of open flowers that people are reporting in Nature's Notebook. And then this one on the bottom is the proportion of people that are saying yes, like you guys were just saying, for open flowers. So it's kind of like 3 different ways to look at when flowers are happening on common buttonbush in a location. We also have created community calendars. People give a lot of feedback that they want to see all the species at once to be able to kind of get that sense of when bloom timing is happening and when they could potentially kind of provide blooms during different periods. So this is, I think from Oklahoma, a couple different species we had data for. Interesting, if you look here, this is a big gap in data. So the majority of the data that came in on silver maple was actually from a university where the students were not collecting data in the summer. So there's definitely still limitations, and we need more data points to be able to fill in these gaps. We've also looked into different ways to look at the data. So this is that kind of calendar, which is showing the proportion of open flowers. But we also are looking into how we show kind of the sample size that's behind that, how many records make up that graph. So this is a way to kind of, this one here, this bar graph is looking at the number of observations behind that graph. And then this one at the bottom is also including kind of a measure of uncertainty based on the lack of records. So the wider this gray bar is, like, the more uncertainty, whereas this is a lot more certain at this time of year. So we're more confident about the start than the peak for this particular graph. So we're kind of looking into those different options. I won't go through all these, but my take home here is we've also done a lot of work to look at what is out there in the scientific literature in terms of what people are finding about how flowering timing and seed timing is shifting in response to climate change, and we're trying to summarize that. We're also summarizing climate projections. So we're really fortunate that the South Central CAST, the Climate Adaptation Science Center, actually does these projections for 2 different emission scenarios, looking at things like how annual high temperature is going to shift, as well as like dry spell length. And so we are incorporating all that into our projections, and including information about generally for each state, how things are projected to shift. So what we're trying to end up with here is a way to be able to tell people how we predict flowering timing is going to shift under future conditions. So we've been doing, this is kind of preliminary, but a series of linear models to try to identify what are the drivers or the cues to different flowering events for different species. So for example, we identified that spring minimum temperature seems to be a cue for the eastern purple cone flower flowering. And then the effect size is basically, we expect that with each degree increase in Fahrenheit, we will see onset 7 to 14 days earlier. We can then use these projections to see how that flowering timing might shift. And so this is kind of our preliminary with some of the species where we had enough data to do these models, how we project this timing is going to be shifting under future conditions. So we're going to be revisiting these models, I think, as we get more and more data. Hopefully we'll have more species that we can do this for. We also need to have more local results. So this is like basically the whole region, even pulling in some data from outside the region because we just didn't have enough data. But this is kind of the process that we are anticipating doing as we go forward and get more data for the project. So if you'd like to learn more about Time to Restore, the QR code here goes to the story map that we put together. This is one of our info sheets that we created for our kind of first phase of the project. And we're going to be revisiting these and kind of updating them as we go along. We'll leave it up for a second in case anyone wants to snap the QR code. I can also put a link at the end. As far as future work, of course, we need more data, but we're also just about to launch the herbarium data component of the project. So we have a collaboration with the Botanical Research Institute of Texas and the TORCH, which is the Texas-Oklahoma Consortium of Herbaria. We're going to be having a couple of students go through herbarium records and pull out phenology data. And that will really give us a really more of a temporal depth to our study, being able to look at how flowering has changed because we'll have records from previous decades. And then we'll be updating those info sheets as we're able to update the models and the results. And then also we're still grappling with this idea about, where should these results end up? We can produce our own, info sheets and things like that, but we really want to make sure that this information gets to the right place. So we're still thinking about, do we try to work with these other organizations that already have phenology calendars and, bloom calendars and plant guides to get this information there? Do we work with people to develop like resilient plant lists? So there's lots to still unpack here. And if anyone wants to work with us on this, we'd love to do that. Okay, I don't want to take too much more time, so I want to leave time for questions, but I wanted to mention really briefly 2 other efforts. So our Nectar Connectors is a data collection campaign that we started actually at the request of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service back in 2017. That was when the Monarch was first being considered for listing, and they asked us, well, what do you have about information about nectar availability for monarchs? And we didn't really have much at the time, so we launched this effort. We worked with them to develop this plant list. It includes 50 species from these different genera. And we do this campaign every year. It's a national campaign. We have people across the country reporting so we can identify things like when flowering is starting, and then also places that have that high intensity of 50% or more open flowers, and when that's happening in different regions. And then lastly, I wanted to mention our Desert Refuge project. This is funded by a partner grant from MJV and the U.S. Forest Service International Programs in collaboration with the Desert Botanical Garden up in Phoenix. This has been a project to try to understand what's going on with monarchs in Arizona during the winter. It's really interesting that they seem to be really active all winter long. We have a lot of milkweeds here that don't go dormant. They're just constantly have leaves and flowers. So we're having observers across the state track not only the activity of monarchs when they're seeing adults and caterpillars, but also when they're seeing the milkweed phenophases. So when they're seeing young leaves, when they're seeing open flowers, to try to figure out if there's some like cues that they're using. Are they attracted to certain plants? Which of the milkweeds do they seem to use? We have, I think, 7 different milkweed species here that we're tracking. And we also have a couple of resources for, kind of activities, educational activities for this project in both English and Spanish, if anyone's interested in those. So I know that was super brief, but I just want to get to the end here so we get to questions. So yeah, I invite you to use Nature's Notebook. If you want to join our Time to Restore quarterly calls, if you're in the South Central region, we'd love to have you. Send me an email. My email's on this slide here. We'd love to have you join those. You can also check out our phenology data. I didn't really go into this, but we have a great visualization tool as well to kind of get a sense of what data are available. We have data download tools. We have an R package, lots of different resources. And then if you want to sign up for our newsletters, I have that QR code here too. But thank you. Sorry, I kind of rushed at the end, but if there's any questions about any of that stuff, I'm happy to answer them.
Wonderful presentation, Erin. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for participating in the poll and for giving your reactions. I know I love those reactions. We were talking before the presentation started about it, so thank you. We were keeping a big list of some of the resources that Erin was talking about, and so those will go out on Friday in the email with the recording of this presentation. So with that, we will jump into a few questions here. If anyone has continued questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A box. We're going to start with one that was upvoted, and I'm going to summarize this one a little bit, but this person is interested in how to shift public perception of the yard, the lawn, the postage stamp, suburban lawn. This person is a leave the leaves and dandelions in the yard. She wants to transition into, more of the planted wild areas, but neighbors don't often appreciate it or think it's, an eyesore. Any advice that you can give to that topic?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, personally, we have a very natural yard in my house. It's kind of weedy, I would say. I mean, we have almost all native plants, and I am also part of my neighborhood association, and I've tried to, talk to them there and given presentations about like all the species we're noticing in terms of the pollinators and like, how many different birds we see, and we have these different plants because we feel like they're important to these different species. And I feel like we've changed some minds that way. We also put up a little free seed library at our house that we just collect seeds in our yard, mostly wildflowers, but some other things we kind of collect around the neighborhood as well. And we try to put little information on the seed packets, and that's been super popular. I think people are like, oh, well, cool, I can get seeds for free, and that's a way for me to like try this out without, investing a lot of money into buying plants. So that's one thing we've tried. I think in terms of what we heard in the stakeholder workshops, I think just as more and more people do it, it becomes more acceptable. And I think people have to see the yard when it's like at its most beautiful too. Often I think they notice it when it's already weedy, but I've seen in different newsletters, people posting like the peak yard where it's like all in bloom and there's a ton of pollinators that you can see in the photo, and kind of sharing that out and like, this is why we're doing this. And then also emphasizing why we care about leaving, dead twigs and things like that, and how they're used by different bees, and just educating people about that, I think is really important as well.
Awesome, thank you. And I'll just add to that. I recently called the city that I just moved to in Minnesota because I found out that milkweed was listed as a noxious weed on their list. And even the person that I talked to in the office was like, oh my gosh, I have milkweed growing in my yard. I think it's just something that's there and never has gotten changed in the past. But doing some advocating work like that, to call your city, to talk to your neighbors, I think there's sometimes just that lack of education and lack of knowing. When the MJV has these great pollinator signs, that you can put in your yard. There's a number of different organizations that have those, have QR codes, and that they can just continue to teach as they look at your beautiful space.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
That's a great point.
Thank you. And we'll add a few more resources about that to the email that'll go out later. This was a question when you were talking about the understanding needs in the Time to Restore project. It says, would those resources have information on managing these habitats with prescribed fire, grazing, or mowing?
I'm not sure about that. It could be. I can definitely share out that link to that spreadsheet that we have that has a lot of the plant guides. I'm trying to remember if any of them had to do with that specifically. I don't know, but yeah, I'll take another look at that and then make sure you guys have that link.
Great, thank you. This one talks about kind of that shifting plant species piece. They've read about, we're heading into a time where planting species native to more southern areas could be a better preparation for managing climate change. As temps increase, northern climates start to have environments closer to southern, so those plants could survive better. Is that something NPM is seeing, or do you think that it has merit at this point?
Yeah, so that's something that we've been talking about. We actually brought that up in our stakeholder workshops, and we use the terminology like a climate analog. Some of you might have heard that, where it's basically saying like your city or your area is going to have the climate that this other city further to the south has right now. And we asked people specifically, if we deliver information, would you want it to be presented that way, like as a map kind of showing the change? Or would you prefer we deliver information about like the projected shifts, like this number of days different, into a plant guide that already exists? And they said both. So we're still grappling with that. Of course, everyone wants everything, but yeah, how to kind of like get across that information. But I think there is value to the climate analog because it's like something that's pretty easy. It's like intuitive to think about that way. In terms of whether those plants are doing well, we don't really have information about that. But I think that's part of the project here is looking at, you can have a calendar for an area that might be further south of you, and you might be able to use that as a way to see like, oh, that's kind of what I want to target in terms of the bloom coverage that we don't have right now. So yeah, I don't know exactly what that's going to look like in terms of how the information is presented, but that's definitely part of it.
I feel that's maybe more applicable to tree planting because of the long term of a tree. I know that in northern Minnesota, they're trying to plant species that may be a little bit more adapted over time. But yeah, I think it's just also paying attention to the changing ecoregions map and how things are shifting, and making sure that you're just staying on top of that.
Yeah, the plant
Awesome.
hardiness zones, that's
Yeah.
another tool through the
Yep.
USDA. Yeah, you can
Yeah, it
look
was
at
kind
how
of
you're,
shocking, the last
yeah,
map
big
and how
shift
much things changed.
for
So,
sure.
yeah. Do you have the list of Texas species?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
let me stop sharing. I can grab that link. Yeah, and that we do have the Time to Restore webpage has all these resources as well. Let me just grab that link.
Cool. And again, we will add those and put them all together for everyone in the email. I did see the other states. Texas wasn't listed on there.
Yeah,
And
it's
then,
oh, I think I just sent that. I just sent it to, oh, I don't know if I can. Maybe someone
yep, we
send that
can.
out. Yeah,
Alyssa can make sure we get that out to everybody.
cool.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
And then just a couple more. Do you have to join a project on iNaturalist?
So we do have a project on iNaturalist. You don't have to, but yeah, I didn't mention that. We have, let me grab that. And that one should have all of our species on there. I think we just added the Texas species there. So yeah, I think if you are an iNat user, we would love for you to use the annotations. So we recently worked with iNat to try to like standardize those for phenology. So before there were like hundreds of them that were like all different versions of open flowers or flowers that are open and all these different things. So if you're able to go back in, I think you have to do this after you've submitted your observation on the computer rather than on your app, but you can add on tags that say, this is the stage that I saw the plant in, and that will really help us make those more useful.
Great. It looks like we've got maybe one more question and we'll finish up. Is there a counterpart of Nature's Notebook data collection in mid-Atlantic states? I know you talked very specifically about Arizona and neighboring states, but it's national.
Yeah, so Nature's Notebook is national, and actually you can use it in Canada and other places too, Mexico. There's nothing that prevents you from setting up a site outside. It's just that the species list is limited to species that are mostly in the US. Yeah, and so Nature's Notebook and also Nectar Connectors is the national campaign. So there should be species on that list that are in the Mid-Atlantic as well.
Excellent. Well, Erin, thank you so much. We cannot thank you enough for presenting today. Such great information. Thank everyone for participating. Again, doing the poll and the reactions as they come in. I'm just posting, or Alyssa just posted the form. If you could please fill out the feedback form today, just click on that, open that up before we close the Zoom chat. We really appreciate it. We're actually in the works right now of planning our 2025 year of webinars. So we would really love your feedback as to what you've loved and what you'd love to see. And we hope to see you for our next webinar, Elementos de Fundamentales de la I'm going to start that over again. I am not a native Spanish speaker, obviously, and this webinar is special. It's in Spanish. Elementos fundamentales de la mariposa monarca. Fundamental elements of the monarch butterfly. I practiced and I still messed it up. That'll happen on October 22nd at 1 p.m. Central Time with 2 MJV All-Stars, Clarissa Ortega and Luis Orosa. They have worked very hard to write this in Spanish, and we also have a really exciting course coming out that will also be in Spanish. So that will be coming out in a couple weeks on the Monarch Nectar Hub. So yes, a fully Spanish webinar. I will take a back seat to this one and leave it to the experts. But please share the registration link. I'm going to throw that in the chat as well real quick. If you can share the registration link with your networks, so that they can attend this amazing webinar. Pardon me, let's find that link here. And I'll just throw that in the chat. Again, thank you, Erin. Thank you everyone so much for being here, and everyone have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Okay.